What's a company secret you can share now that you don't work there? Story 1. I worked at Radio Shack for a year and a half in the early 90s, and let me tell you, the ethics were questionable. Whenever a customer returned an item because it didn't work, the store manager would simply rebox it and put it back on the shelf as if it were new. When I questioned him about it, his response was, "Hopefully, they'll return it to a different store." One day, a customer came in to buy 3 walkie-talkie CB radios for a hunting trip. We only had 2 functioning units. The third one was one I had tested and knew didn't work. Right in front of the customer, I told the manager that the third unit was defective. The customer was grateful for my honesty. We arranged for him to pick up a working unit at another store, and he left satisfied. However, the manager was furious and nearly fired me for refusing to sell the broken radio. I stood my ground. There was no way I was sending someone into the wilderness with faulty gear. The funny twist? A few months later, that same manager was caught stealing from the store and got fired. Karma works in mysterious ways. Story 2. I used to work for a rural ISP that serviced a small area. One of our access points served 13 customers, but we only had 12 IP addresses available. This meant that at any given time, only 12 customers could be online. Whenever someone from that area called to complain about their internet not working, we had a simple but shady solution: log in and reboot the tower's radios. This would disconnect everyone, forcing the DHCP to assign new IP addresses, ensuring the complaining customer got online. I brought this issue to management, explaining how it made us look unprofessional and unreliable. I emphasized that in small rural communities, bad impressions spread fast. When you upset one customer, you're essentially upsetting their entire family, friends, and community. Management refused to allocate funds to fix the problem, so I often gave frustrated customers a free month of service. I knew it wasn't solving the issue, but at least it softened the blow. Story 3. I used to work as a receptionist at an upscale salon. At one point, the salon introduced a new line of products marketed toward men. Before that, most of the products had been marketed exclusively toward women. The new line was identical to the existing products, but it came in black packaging with the word "man" on it. The kicker: the men's products were priced at half the cost of the women's products. The owner explained this by saying, "Well, men don't want to pay that much for hair products." From that point on, every time a woman came up to buy shampoo, I'd tell her about the men's version. Why pay double for the same product just because the bottle is pink? Story 4. I worked at a Petco in Alaska, where black or brown mice weren't allowed. Only white mice were permitted. When we received a shipment of black or brown mice, they had to be sent to the vet to be euthanized. The animals we sold arrived on UPS trucks, packed in boxes like regular deliveries. You never knew what you'd open: fish, mice, or even snakes. It was surreal. My shift manager, however, was a genuinely good person. She worked hard to care for sick animals and kept their living spaces clean. Often, she stayed after hours to tend to the animals. Upper management, on the other hand, didn't care about the animals. Their focus was on sales. If I didn't pester every single customer about signing up for pet rewards, they'd get upset and deduct points from my performance. I never figured out what those deductions meant, but they were a constant threat. One manager even watched me work the register for 3 hours and criticized me for not being pushy enough with upselling donations or memberships. He also got mad when I spent time cleaning the bird cages, claiming it took time away from the register. I refused to cut corners on cleanliness, especially for the birds. If they wanted me to harass customers instead of ensuring the animals were cared for, that was their problem. And don't even get me started on the fish. We constantly received shipments riddled with diseases like ICA. Half our tanks were in quarantine at any given time. Customers often returned, furious that our fish had wiped out their entire tanks. It was heartbreaking and completely avoidable. Story 5. While in college, I worked part-time at a Domino's franchise owned by a man named Marvin Covington. At first glance, he came across as a short-tempered penny pincher, micromanaging even the amount of cheese used on pizzas. In the pizza industry, cheese is called white gold. However, after a while, I understood why he was so strict about margins. Twice a year, he would send out generous bonuses to his employees, funded from his personal savings. These money orders always came with the memo line, "Keep learning." The amount each employee received was directly tied to the store's profit margins, effectively making it a profit-sharing program. After I graduated, I heard that he tried to establish an education grant trust for students at the Farmer School of Business at Miami University. While I'm unsure if it ever came to fruition, the idea itself reflected his values. Marvin also had a habit of hiring former employees as managers. At the time, all 4 store managers had been promoted from within, and 3 of them had graduated from my college with business degrees. Marvin even helped cover portions of their education costs. Marvin Covington, a Domino's owner from Vevey, Indiana, and a true advocate for his employees, passed away in 2017. He was a remarkable businessman who knew how to do right by his people. Story 6. During college, I delivered pizzas for Papa John's, where the store manager stood out for his obsessive dedication to cleanliness. Every night, he assigned cleaning duties, mopping floors, checking expiration dates, and sanitizing equipment. But no matter who did the cleaning, he'd find fault, lose his temper, and take over himself. He had incredibly high standards. If something was nearing its expiration date, he'd throw it out and order more. He even paid out of his own pocket for specialized cleaning products and services, refusing to use the cheaper alternatives provided by corporate. He once reduced a cashier to tears by shouting, "Would you eat off this floor? No? Then it's not clean enough." Not to demand she eat off the floor, but to make his point. After closing, he'd lock up the store and stay until 2 a.m. cleaning every nook and cranny. The results were undeniable. The store, equipment, and food were always spotless, and customers noticed. Many said they trusted the place more, knowing how much effort went into maintaining cleanliness and freshness. Ironically, the manager constantly doubted himself, believing the store was never clean enough. Despite praise from customers and even industry veterans, he held himself to impossible standards. Eventually, he was promoted to a corporate role overseeing cleanliness and quality in other stores, leading to noticeable improvements across the region. Story 7. I worked at Ashley Furniture, and here's the reality. Most furniture delivered to customers has been damaged and repaired beforehand. I witnessed countless pieces, couches, dressers, nightstands, get broken during offloading and patched up by techs in the warehouse. Approximately 85% of the products sent out were repaired in some way. If you want to ensure your furniture is truly brand new, skip delivery and pick it up directly from the warehouse. Ask them to open it in front of you so you can inspect it. This is part of their responsibilities. By doing this, you save on delivery fees, which are often over $200, and avoid the hassle of returning damaged items. Another surprising fact, those massive hand-carved looking bedposts, they're not carved wood, but cheap 4x4s coated with plaster molds. I once dropped one, and it shattered into countless pieces. Story 8. In the mid-90s, I worked at Olive Garden while in college. One of the lunch specials was the all-you-can-eat soup, salad, and breadsticks for $4.25. It was popular among customers, but a nightmare for servers. Most tables consisted of 2 women ordering this special with water, leaving tiny tips. Working lunch shifts meant making just $5.08 in tips after hours of work. After about a year, several top-performing servers were abruptly fired. It turned out they were running a scam. When customers paid in cash for the lunch special, the servers would reuse the receipt and pocket the money instead of ringing up the orders. Since the soup, salad, and breadsticks could be served without involving the kitchen, it was easy to bypass the system. While the rest of us worked hard for small tips, these servers made an extra $20 or more per shift by stealing from the company. Story 9. I used to work for a software company specializing in call center transcription and analysis. You know the line, "This call may be recorded for quality and training purposes?" It's not just a formality. You're absolutely being recorded. Most call centers record every call for analysis. The recorded calls are run through transcription engines, with personal information redacted and stored in a massive database. The company I worked for went a step further, creating 2 groundbreaking products. One could analyze calls in real time, alerting managers if an agent broke script, upset a caller, or skipped mandatory legal language. The second product involved an AI trained on millions of hours of call audio. It was designed to create better answering bots and improve analysis accuracy. I left while the AI department was still in its infancy, but it was mind-blowing to watch the project take shape. It's the most advanced software I've worked on, and if you've called a company in the US, there's a good chance their systems recorded and analyzed you. Story 10. I worked at several market research companies conducting surveys in malls and at a big box home repair store. We collected data on movies, alcoholic drinks, and other products, paying participants for their feedback. The issue? There were strict quotas based on demographics like age, ethnicity, and gender. Most mall-goers didn't want to participate, especially since we only paid $5 for 45 minutes of their time. Desperate regulars, often junkies, would return repeatedly under fake names to earn the cash. The first company I worked for didn't care and let it slide. The second company had a zero-tolerance policy. They refused to lie or cut corners, but they fired employees for failing to meet impossible quotas. Once we ran out of movies and had to get mallgoers to answer questions about adult diapers and perfume. No one was interested, and my manager and coworkers were repeatedly fired and rehired out of desperation. Things got worse after a tropical storm caused a sewage leak in the office, leaving it reeking of rotten eggs and waste. The mall and the company refused to fix the issue, and customers avoided the area. Management blamed me for not being confident and positive enough, so I quit. At the big box home repair store, my job was to ask retirees about their water systems so the company could upsell filtration products. Retirees loved complaining about their water, but were reluctant to give their phone numbers, which I needed to get paid. I was expected to get 10 leads per hour. Even though the store would be empty after 1 p.m., I didn't get lunch breaks, and when they missed my paycheck, I told them to shove it. Story 11. I worked at a dental clinic where 3M regularly sent us gifts and free food for using their products, a practice that's illegal. Ever wonder why your dentist always recommends Colgate? It's because we get it for free, and that's the only product we hear feedback about. Many clinics are understaffed and overbooked, leading to rushed procedures and cut corners. This can result in infections. At my clinic, a little girl got hand, foot, and mouth disease after a cleaning, and another patient contracted ringworm. Root canals are particularly risky. They're bad for your health and can affect your heart. The bleach-like smell during the procedure? That's Clorox being used to clean the canals. If you're getting a root canal, see an endodontist. General dentists often make mistakes. And yes, you'll need a crown. Once the tooth's nerves are removed, it's dead and prone to breaking. Fluoride is controversial. It's most effective for children, as mature teeth absorb less of it, but it's pushed because it's profitable. Dentists will report you if your child has excessive cavities or missed appointments. It's considered neglect. We can also tell a lot about you. If you smoke, vomit frequently, or don't floss, we know. Behind the scenes, we talk about how messed up your teeth are. Many dentists are buried in student debt and will overcharge to pay it off. Dental assistants may not be as clean as they seem. It's all about appearances. Despite this, it's crucial to take care of your teeth. Brush and floss at least twice a day, floss before brushing, and always brush your tongue. Rinse your mouth after consuming sugary drinks, and change your toothbrush every 3 months. Stop trusting everything your dentist says. Get a second opinion when needed. Remember, once a tooth is damaged, every procedure makes it weaker. Insurance often doesn't cover dentures, so protect your teeth. You need them for balance, tasting food, and overall health. Guard your smile. It's worth it. Story 12. I worked at a county animal shelter where animals brought in by animal control were put up for adoption if they weren't claimed. One part of my job involved identifying the most likely breed for dogs. This was especially tricky with pit bulls due to housing restrictions and breed bans. To give these dogs a fighting chance, we would creatively identify their breeds. If they were short with an underbite, we'd label them as a bulldog mix. If they had a longer snout or specific coloring, we'd call them a lab mix, deep chest and droopy lips, mastiff, or boxer mix. Legally, we couldn't outright lie, but we'd stretch the truth as much as possible. Everyone knew they were pit bulls, but calling them something else helped them get adopted. Most of these dogs were sweet with no behavior issues beyond the usual shelter habits like leash pulling or jumping from excitement. Unfortunately, the shelter served an area where 80–90% of housing didn't allow pit bulls. These dogs would sit for weeks, passed over because, I love him, but my apartment doesn't allow pit bulls. Though the shelter director never officially sanctioned it, they didn't stop us from fudging the breeds. It was the best we could do to help these dogs find loving homes. Story 13. I worked at a Cedar Fair park as a Halloween haunt actor, and the job came with a lot of shady practices. Injuries were brushed under the rug. I once slammed my hand on an exposed screw, and all I got was a Barbie Band-Aid. When I was told making a fuss could cost me my job, I stayed quiet. I was 17 and loved the work too much. The strobe light area was another nightmare. At least one person a week would pass out from seizures, but they never adjusted the setup. They also convinced actors to build their own haunted houses before the season, unpaid. Then there was the creepy pedophile who frequented the haunts. Despite complaints from underage actresses about being touched, he was never banned because he was friends with the manager. Senior actors would keep an eye out for him, and if they spotted him, the girls would hide while the guys glared him down. He'd complain but couldn't prove anything, so we made it work. Despite the issues, the job had a weirdly passionate culture. Most of us stayed quiet about the problems because we loved the experience. Story 14. Costco has an excellent but highly abused return policy. Only 6 items, cell phones, tablets, computers, cameras, appliances, and TVs, have a limited return window. Everything else falls under member satisfaction. This means you can return almost anything. A printer that broke after 5 years? Return it. A fully eaten rotisserie chicken with bones you don't like? Return it. A Christmas tree that died in January? Return it. These are real examples I've seen. While this policy seems outrageous, Costco rarely loses out. They make most of their profits from memberships and often get credits from manufacturers for returned items. The extended warranties they offer are also worth it, and I've seen them save people tons of money on repairs. Convenient? Yes. Overused? Absolutely. But for customers, it's peace of mind knowing you can always return something if you're not satisfied. Story 15. Hot drink vending machines are absolutely disgusting inside. I've worked with machines in 5-star hotels and factory break rooms, and they're all the same. Filthy. Flies are common, and your drink will often pass through stale, moldy powdered milk before reaching your cup. Cleaners rarely deep clean these machines because they don't want to risk breaking parts. Over time, coffee and milk residue builds up into tar-like sludge. The milk chutes grow mold, and flies feast on the residue. Overflow buckets inside the machines are often left for days, creating a rancid smell and more mold. Even coffee machines at McDonald's are problematic. The cleaning process is automated, but employees rarely follow procedures. Instead of inserting cleaning tablets, they'll press sensors with random objects like cup lids. The milk lines and valves inside grow chunks of mold, and the dispensing heads often go uncleaned for weeks. If you're fine with your hot drink passing through a moldy water park slide of residue, go ahead. But personally, I'll pass on vending machine coffee. Story 16. Schools, particularly elementary ones, are not as trustworthy as many people believe. The staff are just regular people with their own opinions, biases, and morals, and these often show in how they treat the children in their care. If a teacher or staff member dislikes or disapproves of you as a parent, they might subtly take it out on your child, even if your child is as young as 3 or 4 years old, disabled or not. I had to quit my dream job working with children at a school because of the unprofessional and outright disgusting behavior I witnessed from staff towards students. This was during the Trump COVID era. So many people's true colors were on display. Racist teachers, they'll treat your child differently but won't show it to your face. Disdain for low-income families, your child will feel it in how they're treated. Disgusted by your child, they'll act accordingly. People place far too much trust in the school system, but from my perspective as both a staff member and a parent, schools right now are treacherous. I decided to homeschool my son because I didn't want this to be his experience. Story 17. The way the U.S. federal government handles money is something many don't fully understand. Let's say an office has a $10,000 annual budget for staples, printers, chairs, etc. If the office only spends $8,000, the remaining $2,000 doesn't roll over. Instead, next year's budget will be reduced to $8,000. To avoid this, managers scramble to spend every last penny. Suddenly, you'll see them buying big TVs for training, popcorn machines, or other unnecessary items just to turn in a negative budget and argue, we need more. Perfectly good chairs under warranty get thrown out and replaced to ensure every dollar is used. On the flip side, I've seen offices legitimately run out of money early in the year. Managers would bring in their own printer paper because, despite the government claiming to be paperless, printing remains a necessity. Upper management won't bend on outdated requirements, demanding things printed when digital copies would suffice. They'd even say things like, I don't care how you make it happen. I want that paper on my desk by Friday. It's a broken system, swinging between waste and desperation, with employees stuck in the middle. Story 18. I used to work for a state-controlled liquor store where we were state employees. When Costco wanted to enter our state's liquor market, they lied to the public to pass legislation for private liquor sales. They claimed their proposal would cut liquor prices in half, but in reality, the bill included a 27% price increase. Costco banked on people not reading the bill, and they were right. As state employees, we weren't allowed to inform customers because it would have been considered corruption or vote tampering. Costco's campaign painted state-run liquor stores as monopolies, but they conveniently left out that they were replacing it with a private monopoly. With only one distributor per brand, there's no competition to keep prices low. Products that used to cost $10 now cost $25 wholesale, and that's before taxes. State-controlled liquor stores had strict price controls and contributed revenue to essential services like schools, ambulances, and police. Now, with the state out of the picture, that revenue is gone. Instead, private companies manipulate the system, forcing stores to buy unwanted inventory just to get access to popular items. Prices are higher, services are worse, and employees are no longer union protected. Costco lied, and liquor prices were never going to drop. It's a lesson in reading the fine print and understanding who really benefits from these reforms. Story 19. Years ago, I worked at a sports store where the cost price of items was hidden in plain sight on price tags. Underneath the retail price, there was a code using the word copyrights, where each letter represented a number. C equals sign 1, O equals sign 2, and so on. For example, if a pair of running shoes had a retail price of $239.99 and the code CTOS below it, I knew the store paid $129.99 for that item. This allowed us to negotiate discounts while still maintaining a profit. I'd offer small discounts on big-ticket items like shoes, then bundle them with high-margin items like socks. For instance, I might knock $13 off a pair of shoes and sell 2 pairs of socks for $10. The customer felt they were getting a deal, and I'd recover part of the discount through the sock sale. Customers left happy, and I gained loyal, repeat customers. Managers loved this approach because it boosted sales while keeping margins intact. It was a win-win system, and I had a lot of fun working with it. Story 20. I worked for a company specializing in payroll and HR software, and we had access to the social security numbers of everyone employed by the companies that used our services, including celebrities like the Kardashians. It was surreal and, frankly, concerning how easily accessible this information was. The company also asked me to do shady tasks, especially involving work visas and Affordable Care Act reporting. For example, they wanted me to adjust data to make it seem like healthcare was affordable when it wasn't. While I couldn't alter visas as they requested, I did spend countless hours manually rewriting ACA reports to cover their tracks. I worked so much overtime that my boss accused me of lying on my timesheets. They'd say things like, "You must have no life to be working this much." My client list included major corporations, video game companies, and celebrity brands, all of which had their share of questionable practices. The social media giant we're using right now was the worst. They often tried to blame me for their mistakes until I'd show them audit trails proving otherwise. It was eye-opening to see how shady corporations could be, but luckily I left that world years ago. Story 21. At a hotel I worked for, there was an unwritten rule that our chief engineer wouldn't inform the owners about problems they could be held liable for. For instance, the property had a significant mold issue, which was frequently mentioned in guest feedback as complaints about smells or unpleasant conditions. My job included compiling data for the 5-year capital budget plan, and mold-related problems topped the list of concerns. Despite this, the issue wasn't reported to the ownership. The hotel had been teetering on the edge of bankruptcy, and acknowledging the mold problem would have required them to spend millions on remediation and ventilation fixes. I eventually left the job but returned after the hotel was sold to new owners. While transitioning to the new management, the previous company ran a program to wipe all user files from the computers. However, because I had admin access, my files weren't deleted. Among them was my documentation on the mold issue. During renovations, I presented this evidence, showing that the previous owners, who still held a 10% stake, were aware of the mold and had failed to act. They were forced to pay millions in remediation costs and additional funds for delays, as entire sections of rooms had to be gutted to the structural supports and rebuilt. It delayed the renovation by 3 months and cost them a fortune, but it finally resolved a years-long health hazard. Story 22. I worked for a major camera manufacturer in Japan in the early 2010s as a software developer. Unlike my team, I was an amateur photographer and very interested in cameras. Through company drinking events, Nomikai, I got to chat with executives about their plans and perspectives on the industry. At the time, mirrorless cameras were gaining traction, and DSLR cameras were beginning to decline. I asked the executives about their strategy for this shift, expecting forward-thinking plans. To my surprise, they dismissed mirrorless cameras as a passing trend and believed DSLRs were here to stay. It shocked me. While DSLRs are excellent tools, they're bulky, and many consumers were already gravitating toward more compact mirrorless systems. Their lack of foresight showed how even industry leaders could underestimate significant market changes. Story 23. A friend who worked at a movie theater shared some wild practices they had to follow. Cooked hot dogs that didn't sell were frozen and stored to prove they hadn't been stolen. Damaged items, like crushed cups, were also kept for months until audits. This was because auditors tracked inventory to ensure managers weren't skimming funds by selling items without recording them. In one instance, a massive stack of cups was crushed by accident, and the boxes had to be stored for 6 months until the audit. If there was any discrepancy in soda sales, those cups were the evidence. The theater also had creative ways to make up for losses. They resold tickets by taking back untorn stubs and pocketing the money to cover other shortages, like unaccounted-for concessions. One employee even had a side hustle, letting people in through the fire door at a discounted price and pocketing the cash. When he was fired, the theater fell apart because he knew how to fix everything. They eventually rehired him under the condition they'd ignore his grift. Story 24. I worked on a drill ship in the Gulf of Mexico for a large oil company. During one deepwater drilling operation, we lost a significant amount of synthetic oil-based fluid, used in drilling because it's considered environmentally friendly, into the subsurface about 5,000 feet below the seafloor. We assumed it had leaked into natural fractures in the rock and sealed the fractures to continue drilling. Later, LSU commissioned our remote-operated vehicles, ROVs, to study sea creatures. One ROV, about 100 feet from our equipment, captured footage of a plume of dark fluid, our synthetic oil, leaking from the seabed. The area was a graveyard of dead crustaceans, with a massive plume surrounded by hundreds of lifeless bodies. A fish swam through the plume on camera and died instantly. I was told not to speak about it, especially since I was a young engineer. While such leaks rarely travel back to the seafloor through fractures, this one did, and the environmental impact was catastrophic. It was a chilling reminder of the unintended consequences of deepwater drilling. Story 25. I worked for a virtualization SaaS company that supported major corporations, hosting virtual machines across servers worldwide. Our system was designed to handle up to 1,000 sessions at a time, but as the company grew, we frequently pushed the limit, handling upwards of 900 sessions daily. We warned management that more servers were needed, but they dismissed our concerns, citing costs and space limitations at the data center. Then came Monday's challenge. We were supposed to provision 1,300 machines, far beyond our capacity. With no response from our vacationing boss, we provisioned 1,000 machines and hoped to explain the remaining 300 unfulfilled requests on Monday. Chaos erupted. Phones rang nonstop with complaints from customers unable to access their machines. When the boss finally arrived, he screamed, "What is happening?" After explaining, he coldly replied, "Lie to them. Tell them there's a back-end problem." He walked out, leaving us stunned. One tech quit on the spot. The rest of us stuck it out but refused to lie, telling customers the truth. We were working on it, but their machines might not be ready. Later, the boss called us into a meeting and berated us, blaming us for the situation. I stood up and said, "We don't like the way we're being treated, and we won't stand for this." A week later, I was fired. I sued for wrongful termination and unpaid overtime, winning $10,000. The other techs later thanked me, as the boss's behavior improved significantly after the lawsuit. He stopped cussing and became more considerate. It felt good knowing I made a difference, even if it meant losing the job. Story 26. I worked at a Walmart nicknamed Kevin's Graveyard because the store manager, Kevin, was awful. He belittled employees, used slurs in meetings, and cared only about his personal bonuses, all while paying us the lowest wages of any Walmart in the state. For 2 years, he even froze raises while taking multiple vacations annually. I tolerated this for 4 years, but I eventually decided to fight back in my own way. As a cashier, I had access to the price changing button, which allowed us to match competitor prices. I used this power to help struggling customers. For instance, I once rang up an entire cart of groceries for mere pennies for a woman who had just lost her mother and sister in a car accident. She was in tears and called me a blessing. I did this consistently for my last year there, giving significant discounts to those in need. I wasn't alone. Other cashiers did similar things. Kevin was too incompetent to notice, as long as his paycheck remained hefty. While I know what I did could be considered theft, I don't regret it. I helped people and it made my job bearable. It felt like I was a blue-shirted, khaki-pants Robin Hood. Story 27. I worked at a Forex company that scammed people under the guise of legitimate business. The company used client deposits to pay bills, which is illegal. They outsourced sales agents to non-European countries, another violation. The business thrived on lying to clients, preying on those who wanted to get rich quickly. Sales agents gave false investment advice, convincing clients to invest in risky CFDs, contracts for difference, without explaining the associated fees or risks. If clients couldn't close positions profitably, they lost everything. The consequences were devastating. One Swiss man lost his company, his home, and his family, leaving him on the brink of suicide. Another man with a mental disability was scammed out of 50,000 euros, leaving him 10,000 euros in debt. A woman trying to deposit 1,000 euros was tricked into depositing 7,000 euros after being told to refresh the page multiple times. Sales agents partied with vodka and cocaine at work, earning 10% commissions on deposits, ensuring clients had little chance of recovering their money. Many victims were too ashamed to report what had happened. I hated myself for working there and eventually left. The experience was a harsh lesson in how greed and deception thrive in unregulated spaces. Limassol, where this company was based, felt like a haven for unethical business practices. Story 28. I worked at Chipotle for 2 years, and while the company has high standards, we didn't always follow them perfectly. For example, if the food wasn't at the correct temperature during checks, we'd fix it but lie on the paperwork. Our cleaning was sanitary, but pans sometimes had bits of rice or beans stuck to them. We were supposed to wash our hands every hour, but we often washed so frequently, every 10 minutes or so, that we'd ignore the alarms or turn them off altogether. As for the infamous ice machines, we kept ours pretty clean. But I heard horror stories from my GM about black mold at other locations, and even at McDonald's where he used to work. Most of the food served in the mornings was refrigerated leftovers from the night before, which we reheated. We used to store it with just parchment paper and a spoon, but eventually sealed it properly. Chipotle claims they donate unused food, but most pantries don't want perishables, so it usually ends up in the trash. Corporate didn't let us take leftovers, but occasionally we'd sneak them out. Chips were the exception. Some workers would fill trash bags with extras to take home. We were meticulous about expiration dates, but produce would occasionally sit long enough to grow mold. While we usually threw out the entire container, sometimes only the affected items were discarded. The back of the house was a cloud of vape smoke, with even the GM joining in. We weren't supposed to use bleach, but we snuck it in for deeper cleanse. We gave out free food frequently by marking it as a regular order. If we exceeded our budget, we'd stop logging it altogether. On the plus side, undercooked meat was never a concern because all our meat was pre-cooked. Despite the rule bending, I always felt safe eating there, and I trusted my coworkers. I even ate Chipotle every day and planned to return during summer breaks from college. The biggest frustration? Corporate micromanagement. We weren't allowed to put up signs unless they were corporate approved, which caused constant customer complaints when we ran out of ingredients, change, or had broken equipment. On a personal note, I was one of the best employees, regularly praised by managers and coworkers. I was promised a raise, but due to an error, others received it instead. After months of waiting, I got a measly 25-cent increase instead of the $2 I was promised. A friend was hired shortly after at a starting pay over $1 higher than mine, despite my year-and-a-half tenure. While I understand the need to incentivize hiring, it was disheartening. Story 29. I used to work at a pet store in Wisconsin that sold puppies, and it was heartbreaking. The puppies were bought very young, and it wasn't uncommon to find one dead in the kennels during morning shifts. The back kennels were tiny, with 4 dogs crammed into each. If one died, the others were forced to huddle next to the body. The store claimed they didn't source from puppy mills, but their fashion breeders were just a rebranded version of the same unethical practices. The first and only time I found a dead puppy, I reported it to my manager. She calmly logged it into the system as failed, next to the breed's name, as if it were just another item in inventory. I quit shortly after. That store has since shut down, but I'm unsure if the chain is still operating. Please, never buy a dog from a pet store. The animals deserve better. Story 30. At my last job, the company had a ruthless strategy to cut costs. They'd have their most skilled employees train new hires, passing on years of knowledge and trade secrets. Once the training was complete, the skilled workers would be fired and replaced with the cheaper new recruits. When they approached me to train someone, I was brought into a room with the owner, the top supervisor, and the recruit. They explained the plan. I was to share all the knowledge I'd gained through years of experience, trial, and error. After they finished laying it out, I sat in silence for a minute, watching their smug expressions as they anticipated my compliance. Then I calmly said, "No." Their jaws dropped. The supervisor demanded an explanation, and I slowly replied, "Why in the F would I give you what separates me from everyone else? What gives me value over my peers? If I did this, I'd be pretty stupid." I stood up, added, "Nice try," and walked out. I continued working there for several years, but that day was never mentioned again. The moral: understand your worth. If you choose to share your skills or knowledge, make sure you're compensated fairly. Don't give away what makes you valuable for free. Otherwise, you might look back and regret being so naive. Don't be an idiot. Know your value. Story 31. I worked as a technician at CVS Pharmacy, where I helped fill prescriptions and handle customer service. Despite the high demand, CVS intentionally understaffs its stores and pharmacies to cut costs. On a typical 14-hour day, where we needed 4 technicians and 2 pharmacists to manage 500-plus prescriptions, 50-plus vaccinations, 200-plus deliveries, and 50-plus phone calls, we were lucky to have 1 pharmacist and 2 technicians. We were instructed not to answer the phone because there simply wasn't time. If disabled or elderly customers couldn't physically come into the store, there was often no way to assist them. Tragically, some regular customers died because we couldn't get their medications to them in time. When customers came in complaining about the phone not being answered, we were told to lie and say the phones didn't work. One day I was trying to help a customer over the phone when my pharmacist grabbed the receiver and hung up because a line of 40 people was waiting. I also tried to work extra hours to help my overwhelmed coworkers, but corporate reprimanded me because they couldn't afford to pay me for unscheduled shifts. Meanwhile, CVS treated its top executives to a private John Legend concert and a trip to Disney World. I quit the following week. Story 32. I worked for a defense contracting company that specialized in tracking individuals by dragnetting cellular communications over entire cities. This data was sent to processing centers to analyze metadata, which, when aggregated, functions as a digital fingerprint. By examining the relationships between data points, we could pinpoint specific targets. Once identified, the target's metadata profile could be tracked in real time, allowing law enforcement or military personnel to intercept them. This system, used by organizations like the DEA, Special Forces, and foreign militaries, relies heavily on extensive digital surveillance. The concerning part is how this technology is tested. Entire cities in the southern United States were used for trials, and the data from those tests is already stored and ready for potential domestic applications. While the program was designed for criminal activity, it could easily be repurposed to target political opponents or activists. Cell phones are especially vulnerable, as metadata isn't encrypted even if the contents of the communication are. The only way to avoid being tracked is to disconnect from the internet and cellular networks entirely. This system represents a dangerous tool in the hands of authoritarian regimes. At the time I left, I wasn't aware of it being used against domestic targets, but it is fully capable of doing so. Raising awareness of this technology and its potential misuse is critical to protecting privacy and democracy. Story 33. I'm a special education teacher, and I'm sharing this as an individual, not on behalf of my organization. Parents need to know their rights under FAPE, free and appropriate public education. Schools are legally required to provide assessments if requested, but many public school districts withhold this information to save money. Schools often delay assessments by claiming they need to observe and collect data, which sways many parents into dropping the request. They may even outright deny the need for an assessment. These are lies. Schools are federally obligated to provide assessments, even if they need to contract outside agencies or practitioners to do so. I was reprimanded for offering an assessment to a parent, only to find out that I was following federal law. I threatened to sue if the reprimand wasn't removed, and they backed off. Parents, don't take no for an answer. When requesting assessments or information, research FAPE, use terms like neglect and harassment, and give the school a clear time frame to provide results. If possible, have your own practitioner verify the district's assessment. Without a deadline, schools will drag their feet. While I'm pro-teacher and believe in inclusion and diversity in education, I also recognize that public school systems often prioritize saving money over providing for children's needs. Knowing your rights and advocating for your child can make all the difference. Story 34. As an ambitious millennial in the early 2010s, I was on the hunt for a high-paying job that didn't require a degree. I came across an ad promising unlimited earning potential, flexible hours, and training provided for those without experience. The employer's name was synonymous with trust and honest business practices, so I felt like I hit the jackpot when I got hired. I started the job with 4 other new hires, thrilled to begin my first office position. I took diligent notes during training, brushing off red flags. But after just a week, I walked out without ever collecting a paycheck. Why? Because I wasn't really an employee. I was technically self-employed and had to pay to rent my desk. The job was 100% commission-based, with a sliding scale heavily favoring the company. The company's operation was a complete scam, ironically built on the premise of protecting businesses from fraud. My job was to sell accreditations, essentially licenses to use the company's logo to make businesses look more trustworthy. The process also required clients to sign away their arbitration rights. The training was shocking. They gave us a script designed to sound official and bragged about how their company's name gave the illusion of being a government agency, which made people trust them. The worst part? A new hire with an Indian name was forced to change it to a safe white name and coached to erase her accent. I made one sale during my short time there, to an elderly man in South Carolina who was thrilled to be noticed by such a prestigious company. I still regret not telling him the truth. When you see a company with a 3-letter logo in their ad, don't assume they're trustworthy. And if they call you, do what one pair of women did: laugh and hang up the phone. Story 35. As of 2023, most people probably don't see Subway as glamorous, but in 2010 it was a different story. Subway was my first job, and it was also the first place I was ever fired from. After about 6 weeks as a sandwich artist, I was let go. The official reason? I didn't bake enough bread. I laughed when they told me this because I had repeatedly asked for training on baking bread and was always told it wasn't my department. The night before I was fired, we ran out of bread. I warned the owners we were low, but they dismissed it. The next day, we had to close early, and I was blamed. Looking back, I think the real reason I was fired was their nepotism. About a week before, their nephew had arrived from Lebanon. He worked with me on quiet shifts, received training I was never offered, and barely spoke to me. I was the only non-Lebanese employee, and I didn't speak Arabic. I suspect they hired me out of desperation and let me go once their nephew was ready. Another reason? I wouldn't serve subpar food. Subway corporate distributed produce to franchises, and at least 30% of the stock was often rotted. For example, a box of green peppers would arrive with 3-4 peppers completely covered in mold. I threw them away, but the owners insisted I cut off the mold and salvage what I could. I complied outwardly, but secretly threw away food I didn't feel comfortable serving. I couldn't bear the thought of preparing sandwiches with moldy ingredients in front of unsuspecting customers. Then there was the tuna. Subway's tuna salad recipe is 1 part tuna, 1 part mayonnaise. To prepare it, you'd fill 1 bowl with tuna, another identical bowl with mayo, and mix them in a slightly larger bowl. The same method was used for the crab meat back when they had it. While I don't mind mayo, the sheer volume mixed with tuna made me gag. To top it off, 90% of customers who ordered tuna subs would ask for extra mayo and a Diet Coke. Story 36. I worked for Comcast on the voice control remote feature, where users talk into the remote to control their TV. Part of my job involved analyzing utterances, what people said into the remote, that didn't yield correct results. For example, if 150 people said next flick instead of Netflix, we'd listen to their increasingly frustrated attempts, check their search history, and eventually program next flick as a synonym for Netflix. There were only about 6 of us doing this, combing through the data. 2 secrets emerged from this job. First, Comcast attempted to sell its massive trove of data about user behavior, things like which channels were watched most, or how viewers changed channels on the hour. However, the data contained identifying information, so they had to abandon the idea. Second, after a user tweeted that a particular utterance involving a Tyler Perry movie seemed racist, corporate panicked. As damage control, they instructed us to ban all curse words. This led to absurd conversations such as, what about compound curse words like cum dumpster? We implemented the ban, which backfired hilariously when people discovered it blocked titles like Moby Dick and Dick Van Dyke. It made the news almost immediately. Story 37. The infamous McDonald's ice cream machine issues aren't as mysterious as they seem. Most of the time, the machine is down because no one is trained to maintain it, or the trained staff is too lazy to do it. The machines run an automatic heated sanitation cycle that takes 3-4 hours. At my store, I adjusted the schedule, so the cycle started at 3 a.m. instead of midnight, pleasing the late-night crowd. The machines also require a full disassembly, cleaning, and reassembly every 14 days. If this isn't done, the machine locks out entirely. While it's possible to bypass this lockout, it involves draining the machine and removing parts, which most people won't bother doing. The ice cream mix comes in large, unwieldy bags with caps that often fall into the mixing chamber. The frappe machines and soda fountains aren't much better. The frappe machine's lines are supposed to be cleaned weekly or bi-weekly, but this process takes over an hour and is frequently skipped. Behind the back wall of the frappe machine, mold accumulates because the wall isn't designed to be removed. Soda fountain nozzles, especially in the lobby, are rarely cleaned unless there's an inspection. I only eat at one McDonald's in my area because the manager is a former colleague who is obsessive about cleanliness. She fires employees for neglecting sanitation, and I trust her store completely. The rest? Not so much. Story 38. After working as a CNA in long-term assisted living facilities, I've vowed never to live in one. I'd rather die at home. Despite claims of caring about residents, these places are perpetually understaffed and overworked, even before the pandemic. As an 18-year-old, I was tasked with caring for too many patients to provide adequate attention. Patients requiring automated lifts were supposed to have 2-3 aides assisting, but it was often just me, leading to physical strain that likely caused my 2 herniated discs. I constantly worked through breaks to meet patient needs. Hygiene practices were appalling. All laundry, including washcloths used for cleaning patients, was thrown into the same industrial washing machines. Disposable wipes weren't used, and I witnessed CNAs placing used washcloths on resident side tables, where their food would later go, while they finished changing them. Worse, many aides didn't wear gloves during these tasks. I felt like the only person following proper hygiene protocols. While I can't speak for every facility, from what I've heard, these issues are widespread. If you value dignity and proper care, assisted living facilities may not be the best option. Story 39. I worked in a metal shop that made glass frames for high-rises and stadiums, occasionally going out for installs. The place was a nightmare of OSHA violations. My first year, I ran a night shift alone, 6 days a week for 12, 16 hours at a time. The building was isolated, 20 minutes from the nearest gas station and almost an hour from a hospital. Junkies would try to sneak in to get high, and OSHA explicitly forbids working alone in environments like that. When I finally got a crew, they assigned me people who only spoke Spanish, assuming I could communicate fluently because I'm half Hispanic. Meanwhile, the morning shift left dangerous equipment like saws plugged in. Some workers got high on meth or Adderall before and during shifts. Harnesses were rarely used, and a near miss with 2 cranes colliding, something that should have shut down the site for inspection, was never reported. Fights were common. If 2 workers had a disagreement, they'd step outside, throw hands, and then go back to work like nothing happened. The equipment was old and dangerous. A recalled plasma table with a malfunctioning emergency stop almost cost me my life. The torch stayed on and nearly cut my leg off. I was only saved because a coworker yanked me free, dislocating my knee and tearing my ACL in the process. Still a better outcome than having my throat cut by the machine. We operated Skytrax without certifications and often worked without welding gloves. Drugs were openly used to keep people working nonstop. The one good manager we had, who was strict but fair, was fired for being too friendly with us and for pushing to replace dangerous equipment. After he left, things spiraled out of control. I asked for a week off to address my crumbling mental health, marriage issues, and deteriorating physical health, but was denied. My long-promised raise never materialized. Finally, I hit my breaking point. One morning, I handed over my key at 5 a.m., flipped off the management, and walked out to applause from my coworkers. The job started as a promising opportunity but became a toxic environment after management prioritized bidding on more contracts over worker safety. Now, over a year later, my life is much better. My mental health is stable, my marriage is thriving, and I no longer have breakdowns. Story 40. As a former household moving consultant, I've seen the worst of the industry, especially with companies involved in FBI raids. Here's what you need to know to avoid getting scammed. Fake reviews. On your first day as a sales rep, you're required to create multiple email accounts to leave fake positive reviews. Always verify licenses and check for prior business names, or DBAs, doing business A's. A name change often signals too many complaints under the old name. Weight-based pricing, avoid it at all costs. Movers charge you based on the weight of your belongings after they're weighed, leaving you vulnerable to inflated charges. Drivers can redistribute weight from other jobs onto your bill, easily doubling your quote. Instead, opt for space-based pricing, cubic feet. It's easier to estimate, and you can measure items like sofas yourself. For example, a 3-seat sofa is about 65 cubic feet. Binding estimates. Insist on a binding estimate that includes a fixed rate per cubic foot or weight, even if you exceed the estimate. Ask for the cost of a full truckload in writing as a fallback maximum. Get all promises in email form. Packing. Learn how to pack on YouTube to avoid overcharges on materials and space. Movers often use inefficient packing to create more boxes and inflate your costs. If paying by space, ensure the truck has marked lines for cubic feet and monitor how tightly they pack. Local companies. Stick with local movers who handle the entire job themselves. Avoid companies that sell your job to a third party, as you'll be subject to their terms and conditions, often leading to delays and hidden fees. Monitor contract changes. When making changes over the phone, double-check your contract. Rates can be altered without your knowledge, so confirm everything in writing. If you run into problems, contact AMSA, American Moving and Storage Association, for guidance. I worked for scam companies early in my career, but always aimed to minimize issues by asking the right questions up front. While there are good companies out there, the industry is rife with bad actors. If you need help reviewing a bill of lading, BOL, feel free to ask. I'd rather help you avoid the stress and expense of a moving disaster. Story 41. When I was in my early 20s, I worked for one of those business colleges. It was family-owned, and I got the job as a favor. While the owners were kind people, the practices of the institution were anything but ethical. One of my tasks was to process exam results. If a student failed or scored too low, I was instructed to re-enter the answers and change them randomly until they passed. The institution guaranteed a minimum score to its students, so this was routine. I questioned the practice, but felt powerless to stop it. What bothered me most was knowing that many students were investing their own money, often struggling financially, to attend. For some, this was their chance to turn their lives around. They worked hard, attended classes, and took pride in their success, unaware their achievements were fabricated. Some students had no grasp of the material. These were not near-passing scores. They were complete failures. It sickened me to think that someone might hire them, especially in finance roles, and trust them with money they were unprepared to handle. I lasted only a short time before I left. The weight of what I was doing, giving false hope to people trying to improve their lives, was too much to bear. Story 42. I worked at a tribal casino that I'll call Hardly Rock, and it was a grim experience. Addiction, often tied to trauma or genetics, is exploited by slot machines, which are deliberately designed to addict players. For instance, slot machines create false wins. If you bet $1 per spin and win 80 cents, you've technically lost 20 cents, but the machine still celebrates with lights and sounds, tricking your brain into associating the loss with the pleasure of a win. Over time, these small wins fuel the dopamine rush that keeps players hooked. The loyalty cards track everything: your favorite machines, betting patterns, how long you play, and even when you're likely to quit. Algorithms use this data to give you a significant win just before your typical stopping point, enticing you to keep going. Old-school real machines are gone. Modern machines run on random number generators, but I heard that machines with bingo cards on their screens offer the best odds because you're competing against others in the same network. That said, blackjack remains the best game for favorable odds. Suicide rates at casinos are tragically high. In a 2-week period, we had 2 suicides. Instead of treating these incidents with dignity, the bodies were rolled out the back under blankets, out of sight, out of mind. Casinos manipulate their payout systems. Instead of paying out the percentage required by the National Indian Gaming Commission, NIGC, the casino I worked for found it cheaper to pay the fines than to meet the payout requirements. Even the layout of the casino is calculated to keep you inside. The same design firms that create Walmarts design casinos, using long aisles and intersecting sections to create a maze-like effect. No clocks or windows ensure you lose track of time. It's a predatory system designed to exploit vulnerable people, and it's heartbreaking to witness. Story 43. Throughout my career in big retail banking, I noticed an unsettling pattern. Branches were incentivized to generate profits from customer fees. Each branch's profit and loss record, P&L, included fees as revenue, but waiving those fees counted as a loss, even though waiving fees incurs no actual cost. This practice discouraged branch managers from approving fee reversals. I saw countless cases where customers were charged hundreds of dollars in NSF, non-sufficient funds, fees for small charges, like $1.50 at a fast food restaurant. A single day's overdrafts could easily result in $200 or more in fees, as multiple small charges triggered $40 penalties each. Banks had the ability to decline transactions that would overdraw accounts, but they deliberately approved them, knowing the fees would follow. Many of the victims were elderly or disabled individuals who struggled to manage their finances. For those on fixed incomes, The fees could mean going without medication or other necessities. Instead of reversing the fees, we were instructed to sell the affected customers' lines of credit to pay them off, pushing them further into debt. Some habitual offenders generated thousands of dollars in fees annually, essentially becoming cash cows for the bank. The system preyed on society's most vulnerable, and it was deeply troubling to see how these practices were normalized. Story 44. I used to work in an old apartment complex with all the typical problems you'd expect, one of the worst being termites. The termites had been there long before I started working there and were still there when I left a few years later. They would swarm in specific apartments every year, prompting us to call pest control for a spot treatment. The catch with the spot treatments was that they came with a waiver stating the treatment wouldn't resolve the issue, only tenting the building would. If it were up to me, we would have tented the building, but the owners didn't want to spend the money. Beyond the treatment itself, they'd have to pay for every resident's hotel stay for 3 days, which they were unwilling to do. Instead, they'd act surprised when the termites returned each year and keep doing the bare minimum. Our annual termite inspections were a joke. The inspectors only checked a few units, and the owners made sure they avoided the worst affected ones. When it came time to sell the complex, they covered up the termite issues long enough to get the deal done and even destroyed evidence of the problem. I had already left by then, but former co-workers kept me in the loop. Another unsettling thing about working there was how deaths in apartments were handled. Once a body was removed, the apartment would be turned over like any other. In one instance, a man was dead on the floor next to his bed for at least 10 days before anyone found him. The carpet was replaced because his body had leaked through, leaving a stain on the concrete, but a new tenant moved in less than a week later, completely unaware. Story 45. This is a throwaway story because I'm honestly still scared. I used to work in customs, and let me tell you, all those mafia movies about illegal smuggling pale in comparison to what really happens. The profits from customs officials and freight forwarders working together make mafia operations look like small-time schemes. The worst part? It's all technically legal, or at least it's made to look that way. One Saturday, I was covering for a colleague who was out sick. While processing shipments, I came across paperwork for statues, only the statues were filled with guns and bullets. There were so many statues it was mind-numbing. I typically handled clean shipments like wine, furniture, and medical instruments, so encountering something this blatantly dangerous was shocking. On Monday, I pretended I hadn't seen anything. My colleague, now back at work, didn't mention being sick, but slipped me cash equal to a day's pay and more. A year later, things escalated. One of the brokers got into a conflict with clients, supposedly over commissions. Not long after, he was shot dead in broad daylight while driving to work. For a week, the news circulated gruesome pictures of his body, face uncensored, on the front page. It hit close to home because I'd known him in college. We shared classes and study sessions before our licensure exam. Just the day before his murder, he'd posted on Facebook about hiking a mountain. The company issued a hollow statement, and while the investigation pointed to his work as the motive, it was never fully pursued. That week was a nightmare for me, sleepless nights and cold sweats. I handed in my notice, claiming I had an overseas job offer, and got out as fast as I could.